This arrived in the mail the other day, so let's take a quick look at it. Oh, let's open it up and see what it is. I know that it actually is not a Canon speedlight. I've actually only bought 2 flash units in my life. One was the Vivitar 283, and the other, I believe, is like a Metz unit. I want to say a 45. Metz 45. I'd have to go down and really look at that closely. All right, there we are. So here we are. So I alluded to this lens. Actually, I mentioned it in my video about the Kilfitt Makro Kilar and how I was looking at an f2.8 model, and this is an f2.8 model. This supposedly is for a 42 millimeter screw mount. Now you can see there's your 42 millimeter threads, and you can see how far the rear elements, I think it's a group of 2 lenses, protrude from the rear of the lens. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that word. And there we go. This one's the other lens I own is f3.5, and this one's f2.8. So this one is 1 stop faster. Let me see if this fits. Yes. So supposedly this is a filter holder. So I don't know I think maybe you slip the filter in here, and then you drop this in, and then it presses into the front of the lens. Like the other lens, this one focuses to 4 inches and slightly past that. So my guess this is going to be about 3.5 inches, just like the other lens. Focusing ring on this seems to be in pretty good shape. Not too bad. There's a slight little, I'm not sure what that is, slight little imperfection here. Aperture ring turns pretty smoothly. I'm not going to mess with it, that's for sure. And focus on this is a bit tighter, but still very smooth. Now, if you recall, I had mentioned that this was made in Lichtenstein. It doesn't say made in Lichtenstein, but I'm pretty certain that this one was probably made in Lichtenstein because it's the same general design as the other lens. That does say made in Lichtenstein, by the way. There we are. Now, I happen to have a 42 millimeter to NEX adapter. There we are. So now we can mount this to any Sony E-mount camera. I'm going to mount this to the Sony a7 II. We'll take some photos. I think we'll take some different photos. And I'll take this one with me. Remember, this is in the exact amount. So I'll take this one with me. We'll run out there, take some photos side by side. I think the more interesting thing, we'll be shooting at f2.8, wide open at a 2.8, and this one wide open at 3.5. We'll just do a side-by-side comparison. We'll also do some close-up work with both lenses, and then we'll get them back on the computer and see how they look. Construction of both lenses is the same. What is interesting is that the focusing ring is slightly smaller. That is, it isn't as high on the 2.8 version as it is on the 3.5 version, making the 3.5 lens a bit easier to focus. The f2.8 lens features a preset aperture, which means it has 2 aperture rings. One is the actual aperture ring, and the second lets you dial in the selected aperture that you want. So with this lens, the idea is that you pre-select the aperture, open the lens, do your focusing, and then before you press the shutter release, you then close the lens down to its working aperture. The f3.5 version lacks this feature, which means that if you want to use a different aperture, you have to pull the camera away from your eye, set the aperture, return the camera, focus again, and then shoot. A slight inconvenience, In theory, it sounds a lot more difficult than it is in practice. But keep in mind, it does take a couple of seconds, and it does require you to lower the camera from your eye. As I mentioned, the focusing ring on the 2.8 version is rather narrow, and it's sort of worn. And so gripping and focusing with this lens was slightly more difficult than the wider f3.5 version. And on that lens, I had replaced the focusing ring with a replacement focusing ring intended for use on a Tamron lens. As a general purpose lens, I think both perform quite well, offering you a nice range of apertures, the ability to focus very critically, because as I mentioned, going from infinity to your closest focusing distance is almost a 360-degree revolution of the lens. Let's do one thing before we get too far. Let's look at the weight of the lenses, and we'll probably say they're going to be very similar. Perhaps the f2.8 version weighs just a bit more. Now remember, the rear element really protrudes pretty far from the back of the lens, so I'm going to rotate that. Okay, let's take a look, see what both of these weigh. This is the f3.5 version, and it weighs 4.9 ounces, fairly lightweight. And this version weighs 5 ounces, so 1/10 of an ounce difference, or really not much at all. Now I just happen to have a 42 millimeter screw mount Tessar. Remember these are Tessar type lenses. This is an East German lens. This is a Carl Zeiss Jena lens. And let's rotate that out a little bit. Also f2.8, this is 50 millimeter, while both this is 50 millimeter, while both of these lenses are 40 millimeters. And so this one weighs slightly more, 6.1 ounces, really 1 ounce difference. In use, you're probably not going to notice a difference of 1 ounce. All right, so let's get both of these mounted onto a camera, get them outside, and let's see what they can do. And we'll be back. As I did with the original video, I took some photos standing back probably 3 to 6 feet, and then I got closer. And then I moved a bit closer. And then finally, I just set the lens to its minimum focusing distance and moved in as closely as I could. What's nice about shooting close up is we tend to take the world around us for granted. And so things that we walk past and never really give thought to, as you move closer and closer and then closer, it opens up this whole world. So what's interesting is even stop down at f8, depth of field at that distance is still really narrow. I probably should have stopped down to f16, but I do like the effect of shooting at that distance at f8. The ISO I used with most of these really ran from, I think I was ranging from ISO, I want to say around 200 up to about 600. I tried not to go beyond that, and even though I was using a full frame Sony, I really didn't want sensor noise to become intrusive. And keeping the ISO below, let's say 800, really goes a lot towards suppressing sensor noise from intruding into the image. As we look at these photos, many of the photos taken from a distance are going to look nearly identical. I think that the biggest difference became apparent when I moved in close. Part of that is owing to the shallower depth of field of an f2.8 lens compared with an f3.5 lens. Even though it's just a one-stop difference, when you're focusing that closely, it really begins to make a difference. The one thing that I learned, which was not surprising, I prefer the slightly slower version, the f3.5 lens, to the faster f2.8 lens. Through the years, many people have believed that the Tessar design was pushed too far at f2.8, and I tend to agree with those arguments. It's not that it's a bad lens. I just think a Tessar type performs much better at 3.5. Some say f6.3, but I think f3.5 is a decent compromise. Both lenses handled roughly the same, and overall the photos were very similar. Although once again, I think because of the slightly smaller aperture of f3.5, it did offer better depth of field when you need it. At f2.8, when you're shooting at 4 inches, your depth of field is so narrow that there is almost no margin of error when focusing the lens at that distance. Overall, I think they're very decent lenses. They really give a lot of Tessar type performance, particularly when shooting wide open or at that middle aperture range at certain distances, and that would be those moderate, probably 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 feet. What you're going to find is some of those round out of focus backgrounds. And you'll see it in a couple of the photos here taken with both lenses. So overall, when I compare both of these lenses, which is the lens that I would use? When I don't need the extra speed, I'll stick with the 3.5 version. When I do want a slightly quicker lens, a slightly faster lens, remember this is just one stop, I'll then turn to the 2.8 lens. Both of these lenses tend to fly under the radar as people seek out either high-speed lenses or your common 50mm lens. So for those who are looking for something a bit different, think about finding a copy of one of these lenses. Don't be surprised if you have to replace a focusing ring. There are plenty of materials out there as I showed in the original video. And once again, I think this lens is perfect or ideal for shooting close up. I'm very grateful to have both lenses and to be able to do a side-by-side comparison. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thanks for spending some time with me as we look at the f2.8 Kilfitt Makro Kilar. If you enjoyed this video, give me a like or subscribe. If you'd like to leave a comment, please do so below or send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. And don't forget to click on that icon in the lower right corner of the screen for more content about cameras and photography. And I hope you join me on the next video.